Okay, this afternoon we begin one of the bigger characters that we've seen so far. One of the biggest, probably, since we're going alphabetically. I have allotted 3 weeks for this man whose name is Moses. And the reason I think we can get it done in 3 is because his life is very nicely divided into 3 parts. Anybody know what those 3 divisions are? Without looking? It's on. This is on. This is on. Okay. Well, that kind of gives the rest away, doesn't it? Wes says early life, okay? That's number 1. Okay. Here we go. Remember how old he was when he died? That's a wonderful place to start, isn't it? 120. So, we got... 48. Yeah, 40, 40, 40. Yeah, so that's how we're going to approach Moses. We're going to look at the early life, which was birth through 40 years old, which if you have a handout, it's really the first 40 years, it says, from his birth to when he ran away to Midian. It's the same period of time, but the shortest amount of coverage. It's only Exodus 2. But we're going to throw Hebrews 11, 24 through 26 in there today too. Then there's the second 40 years from his flight to Midian to the Exodus. And then there is the third 40 years, which is from the Exodus to his death. So that's the 3 divisions of Moses' life. 40 years, 40 years, 40 years. He was 40 when he fled to Midian. He was 80 when he at the time of the Exodus, and he was 120 when he died. So I think we should be able. We'll still have to leave some things out, especially the more I ramble on now. This is the easy one, okay, because it's only Exodus 2. And not even all of Exodus 2, actually, because I guess it is in a way, but the last little bit is, I guess part of the coverage of him fleeing to Midian is when he was actually in Midian, so that's not as important for today. But the earliest part of his life is, I'll go ahead and pop this up there. I would encourage you to hang on to this paper if you like to use the paper. We haven't been following the paper exactly, or at all in the class, but it is helpful as a reference. This will be it for Moses. So next week there won't be a new. There won't be. I don't have anything new to type up. So this is it for Moses, even though we're going to look at him in 3 different sections here. So Moses, I will go by the handout on this. Of all we can say about Moses, he was the premier prophet. I consider him the premier prophet of God because he was pretty much the first man that we read about anyway who was called by God to be a prophet in a major way, especially in a major way. He was the youngest son of his parents, Amram and Jochebed. And to me, his legacy, the book called him the man who was God's friend or something like that, the man who was the friend of God. To me, that's Abraham, because Abraham is the one who is called explicitly the friend of God. So I tweaked that a little bit and changed it to the man with whom God spoke face to face, because that's how God described Moses. That's how Moses is described a couple of times, I think, but from the mouth of God himself, Exodus 33:11, and again in Numbers chapter 12, as we saw in the case of Miriam and Aaron and their thing, that's what God said. If I have a prophet, I speak to him in dreams and visions. Not so with my prophet Moses, my servant Moses. I speak to him face to face as a man speaks with his friend. So to me, that is who is, if not the legacy, that's a pretty powerful epitaph to have, a scriptural epitaph, if you will, that God himself said, Moses is the one with whom I speak face to face as a man speaks with his friend. So, pretty powerful. So that's what I'm calling him, because the man who was the friend of God is Abraham, and I can't see it any other way. But he was called to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt and to present God's covenant to them, and eventually he wrote the first 5 books of the Old Testament, called the Pentateuch. He's also a type of Christ. And if you think about all the various types, I mean, we've talked about some of them. Sometimes something or somebody might be a type in just one little moment of life, a type of Christ. Moses, there are many things, and the book sort of points these out. They were both, and some of these I could say, I mean, might be a little bit of a stretch, but they both were preserved from the perils of infancy, okay? Jesus and Moses. They were both tempted, but had mastery over evil. That one I would say, Jesus did, for sure. Moses, sure, he did in a lot of instances, but not absolute mastery over evil. They both fasted for 40 days. They both had the power to control the sea. Again, whatever. Both fed a multitude. They both had a radiant face. Mount of Transfiguration and the Mount Sinai. They both endured murmurings. Can't take that one away from Moses for sure. They both were discredited at home. That's a reference to Aaron and Miriam launching that attack against him, and Jesus' brothers not believing in him. Both were mighty intercessors. Moses, and maybe even Aaron's thrown in there, stood between God and the people. That picture alone is a type of Christ, because he is the mediator between God and men. And Moses, on that one occasion, or maybe multiple occasions, stood in the way between God and men to intercede on their behalf. Both spoke as the oracles of God. Both had 70 helpers. Both established memorials. Both reappeared after death. Obviously in a different way, but they did. Technically, Moses reappeared after death, and Jesus did as well. And like I said, he gave us the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They're called the Pentateuch. Jesus said in John 5:46, Moses wrote about me, which sets his seal. Jesus believed that Moses wrote those books. He says he did, and so no reason to speculate. Moses wrote the books, those 5 books. In Exodus chapter 2, some things are going on. Not good things. The Hebrew people are in Egypt. They're growing and growing and growing. They've been there for quite some time, at least 2 or 3 centuries. We don't really know how much time passed between, when we're told of these events and then the events of chapter 2. But at any rate, they had been there for a long time, and a Pharaoh arose that did not know Joseph. That led him to turn against the Hebrew people, the shepherd people that he didn't know anything about except that they're growing, and he was intimidated by them. So remember, the midwives were commanded to, anytime a Hebrew baby boy is born, a baby boy is born of the Hebrews, you kill it. Not allowed to live. Throw it in the river, whatever. When chapter 2 comes along, we read about a man of the house of Levi who married a woman of Levi, and she conceived and bore a son. He was a fine child, the ESV says, but she didn't throw him in the river. Not exactly. She kind of did, but not exactly. What'd she do with him? Okay, before that. She hid him. In other words, never really thought about it, to be honest. What does it mean that she hid him? From whom and in what way? Obviously, she kept it a secret that she had given birth to a boy. In general. I don't know how often there were Egyptian guards and stuff, coming around and like, got any baby boys in the house, anything like that. But word would spread, so they had to sort of keep it secret that they had given birth to this baby boy. You see, the midwives, I skipped over accidentally in chapter 1, verse 17. They feared God, and so they hadn't been doing that, the thing that they were told to do. But when this woman and man gave birth to this son, they hid him for 3 months. But then it says when she was no longer able to keep it a secret, or whatever, hide him, she made the basket. She touched it up, made it waterproof with some sort of, homemade concoction like tar or, pitch or whatever. She put little baby Moses in that basket thing and put it in the reeds at the side of the Nile River. And sent her daughter to watch it. It seems. She stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. It just so happened that at this particular place in the river, and I say it just so happened, I think she knew exactly what she was doing, Moses' mom that is, the daughter of Pharaoh came down there, sees him, or hears a baby crying. Now, if you're standing in a river and nobody's around except your servant ladies or whatever that you got with you, and you hear a baby crying and nobody's in sight, it's kind of disturbing. Why do I hear? Am I going crazy? Why do I hear a baby crying? What is that sound? Where is it? Tracks it down, opens the basket, sees the baby, and she took pity on the baby. She said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children. This baby's a Hebrew." And that's when his big sister comes in, and all according to plan, I think, with the help of God's providence. You want me to go and get a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? She's going to keep that baby. She said yes. And the girl went and got his actual mother. It's really an amazing story and turn of events. This is how Moses' life began. That he winds up being raised for crucial years of his life by his own mother, against all odds, despite everything. So she got to raise, and not to discredit his dad too, under the roof by his mother and father, until the time came that the child grew old enough that he could go and to the house, Pharaoh's daughter, and become her son. It says she named him Moses because she said, "I drew him out of the water." His name might, obviously there's some connection between his name and that, regardless of any uncertainty with exactly what the name Moses means. It has some connection with, it says, my footnote says, the word Moses in Hebrew sounds like the Hebrew word for draw out. So, that's why it says, could mean drawn forth, could mean taken out of the water, or a son. I would say not that one because then it doesn't make sense. But some connection with drawing out or taking out of the water, because the text says that's why she named him that. Now, it is impossible to estimate just how important it was for Moses' development into a man that God, through His providence, led him to be able to be raised openly and without fear in his own parents' house. And it's going to play a huge role later in his life, even in this portion of his life. But if you flip over to Hebrews chapter 11, this verse, this section, my earliest memory of a sermon, or it wasn't really a sermon, it was more of a little devotional, like a youth devotional thing that we had in the congregation where I grew up. My earliest memory of a lesson of any kind that really hit me, and it had been recorded, and I listened to it a lot. It was based on Hebrews 11:24 through 26, and it says this: "By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward." Now, none of that would have happened, and if he hadn't been raised under the roof of his parents, his godly parents. So here's what ended up happening. Now, all of a sudden, in verse 11 of Exodus 2, Moses is grown up, and he records this: "One day, when Moses had grown up, he went out to his people, and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people." So, one day when he had grown up, he went out to his people. Well, who's that? Tells us, the Hebrews. And you might think, well, duh, we already knew that because we already known that his parents were of the house of Levi, and of course they were Hebrews. But I think there's more to it than this. It's not just that reiterating that, oh yeah, he was a Hebrew, but he viewed them as his people. He thought of them as his people. In his mind and heart, his people were mama and daddy's people. Now, again, time is not really, there's not much indication of the passing of time. But I've never had the impression that there was very much time that passed overall between this incident and when he has to run away. So, I mean, even if it's, let's be extra conservative, just say 5 years. Let's just throw 5 years on there. 5 years between verse 11 and verse 15 when he flees to Midian. That means that he was raised as an Egyptian for what? We don't know how old he was whenever his mother turned him over to them. But let's be conservative and say even 10 years old, which I highly doubt it was anywhere near that. But I'm just to make the point. That means 25 years would have passed between, he was raised as an Egyptian for 25 years. If he was 10 years old when his mother gave him back to the daughter of Pharaoh, he was probably much younger than that. Probably younger than 5 even. And if it took 5 years before in verse 11, before he had to run away, because we know he was 40 when he ran away. So if he was 35 in verse 11, that's a long time to be raised strictly as an Egyptian. We don't know how much contact he had with his mother and family after that point, but I get the impression it may not have been that much. We don't know. But at any rate, to all outsiders, Moses probably looked, 35, whatever, 30s Moses looked probably like an Egyptian. His style, whatever they did with their clothes, the kind of clothes they wore, whatever else they may have done, he was basically an Egyptian prince. Because that's kind of, he was in the royal house. He's Pharaoh's grandson, the king's grandson. But he did not view them as his people. And that's the significance, I think, of verse 11. When he had grown up, he went out to his people. He still viewed them as his people because they were his people. And his mother and father obviously instilled that in him, preparing him. They knew that he was going to be going to them, eventually. It seems they prepared him for that. And what's even more interesting is, as we keep reading here, actually, hold that thought. Turn to Acts chapter 7, verse 25. I probably should have included Acts 7 on the handout, but anyway, or at least mentioned there. Because Acts 7, okay, you want to talk about the chapter thing. Acts 7, Stephen. Lisa, do you have that paper? Just for my own curiosity. Is my word for Acts 7 Stephen? Sorry, this is a off the cuff.
Acts 7 Stephen.
Okay, good. Because if I didn't, I would tell you to mark it out and put Stephen. Because Acts 7, Stephen. And Stephen tells some things. We learn a little tidbit about Abraham in Stephen's speech that isn't told in Genesis. We learn a little thing about Moses here that isn't mentioned in Exodus. First of all, we learn in verse 22 that Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Second of all, we learn that he was mighty in words and deeds. Maybe even before he made those excuses, but anyway, the key here is verse 25. Or verse 24 tells us what we're about to read about in Exodus 2. He saw one of his people being wronged, and he defended the oppressed man and avenged him by striking down the Egyptian that was oppressing him. But look at verse 25, because Stephen gives a reason. And it's so fascinating. He supposed that his brothers would understand that God was giving them salvation by his hand. Now, there's not even the slightest inkling of that in the Exodus account. Stephen was just as inspired, and Luke, who wrote Stephen, who recorded that in Acts, was just as inspired as Moses was right in Exodus by the same Holy Spirit. So that reason is inspired of the Holy Spirit. Isn't it fascinating that even at this point, now, chapter 3 is burning bush. Okay? This is before any of that. Moses already, for some reason, had it in his mind that God was going to use him to save his people. Already. Now, what reason is it? We don't know. Maybe God told him, and he learned it somehow. Maybe he had a vision, maybe he had a dream, that kind of thing. But why did Moses do this? Stephen tells us he thought that his people, his brethren, would understand that God was saving them by his hand. But Stephen also tells us they didn't understand that. They didn't get it. That lost in translation, didn't get the memo. And so Moses did this thing because he already saw himself as the liberator of the Hebrew people from Egypt. But it didn't work out. Didn't happen the way he pictured it. He strikes down this Egypt. I don't know what his plan was. He's going to play whack-a-mole with the Egypt, one at a time, like, okay, got this Egyptian soldier or whatever, or it doesn't even say he was a soldier. Got this Egyptian, there's one down. How many to go? Hundreds of thousands? But he looked around. No one saw, or no one was looking, so he killed that Egyptian. Hid his body. Buried it in the sand. Now it says, the very next day. So there's a passing of time. He goes out and sees two Hebrews in a kerfuffle or whatever together. He tried to sort that one out, and he got a wake-up call. And here's the Exodus account of what Stephen called they didn't get it. Part of that explanation, at least. Who made you a prince and a judge over us? What are you our leader? Who made you the judge? Who made you the leader? What, are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian? Well, that got his attention. He thought he got away with it. How'd this man know about it? Don't know. But Moses was scared. And I think you probably would be too. But then Pharaoh hears about it. So here's where the passage of time is not really... We know that there was only one day between... it was the next day when these two things happened, one day apart. How much time... He didn't run away immediately. But eventually, Pharaoh heard about it. And he was going to put Moses to death. Then he runs away to Midian. Insert map here, okay? Just imagine it, because I don't have one for you. I'll do it next week. I pledge, solemnly vow right now, I will include a map next week. Midian was a pretty good chunk of land away. It was across the Sinai Peninsula. Basically, the way that they would have gone when they leave Egypt is the way Moses probably would have gone to get over to Midian. It was sort of around Edom, to the west of Edom or southwest, depending on how far south Edom goes, I think. I'm using my brain map, which could be distorted, but pretty far away. And we'll just include this little bit in there, that there was a certain priest of Midian. Oh, by the way, he sat down at a well, or by a well. I missed that part. So he runs away to Midian, flees Egypt. He's in Midian now. This certain priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came out to get water. And some shepherds came and drove them off. Moses defended them and helped them, saved them, it says, and watered their flocks. So they went home, and they said, hey, some Egyptian guy delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, even got water for us. And he said, where is he? Why haven't you, would you just leave him there? Go get him. So Moses came and stayed with them, and he gave Moses one of his daughters, Zipporah. Eventually he had a son, Gershom. For he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. So this is the first 40-year period, basically, of Moses' life. That pretty eventful. We don't get anything, kind of like Jesus, anything from his very early childhood to when he was, in his 30s, upper 30s. But other than what Stephen told us, he was raised and trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. We could probably spend some time talking about that, some of the examples of that wisdom. Not good. Not very wise. They were the experts in medical science. Experts, heavy quotation marks. What's amazing about the fact that Stephen, we could have assumed it anyway, but Stephen explicitly tells us he was trained in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. You know how much of that wisdom is found in the Pentateuch that Moses wrote? None of it. Not a single bit. None of that crazy stuff. It's all amazing stuff that the Egyptians didn't know, that nobody knew. At least it implies it. Washing your hands with soap. It's not worded that way, but if you look at the ingredients, it's soap. Fascinating. We did not discover the germ as a human race until 1856 or something like that. And the guy was mocked to insanity. Actually went crazy. Everybody made fun of him. Because he said, hey, after you touch a dead body, you might want to wash your hands before you deliver a baby. Shocking. What a kook. But he saved a bunch of people's lives. Why is Moses talking about washing your hands with soap after you've been in contact with a dead thing? Anyway, all the wisdom of the Egyptians is basically all we have from whenever he was sent to Pharaoh's house to when he had to run away to save his own life. There are some lessons that we could take probably even from this early part, and it is really based as much on his parents as it is him. But here's number one, and this one's from his parents. We must obey God rather than men. That's what Peter and John said in Acts chapter 5. That's what the Hebrew midwives did. That's what Moses' parents did. Because the law said, baby boy, throw it in the river or whatever, kill it. It is not to live. But that was an instance of we must obey God rather than men. It's not right. So even if and that has nothing to do with the Hebrews being God's people either. Just period. It's not right. The sanctity of human life deserves better. And it is against God's will. So it was right of them to disobey the king in that respect, because we must obey God rather than men. Number two, something Jesus said that does have to do with Moses, based on those scriptures we looked at in Hebrews 11. What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? That's why I love that. I love the way that Hebrews 11 describes this. Moses refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He probably had everything he could ever wish to have in an earthly sense. He's in the royal house, the king's house, king of Egypt, the superpower, the world superpower at that time. But he chose instead, there's so many words that are key words in this verse, choosing rather not to just be with the people of God. He didn't choose to thrive with the people of God. He didn't choose to even die with the people of God. He chose to be mistreated with the people of God. He, instead of being called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, he chose to be mistreated with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. I would rather be mistreated with God's people than to thrive and flourish with these sinful people. That's powerful. He considered the reproach of Christ, or we might say, the reproach of being faithful to God, greater wealth than all the treasures of Egypt. So, on the one hand, you got the reproach of Christ, suffering for Christ, and all the negative that might go along with it. On this hand, you've got all the riches and treasures in all the world. Which one's worth more? Moses said, the reproach of Christ is worth more. So if the reproach of Christ is greater wealth than the treasures of the world, then how much more are the blessings of Christ worth than the treasures of the world? Infinite. Totally. And thirdly, we should have passion for God's people, but we must demonstrate it properly. Moses had passion for God's people before the burning bush thing ever happened. But he got carried away. And again, it's hard with the information we have. It's difficult to, what in the world were you thinking? Like, what was your plan exactly? Especially in light of what Stephen said. He thought that that the people would just understand that God was saving them through him. What was your plan of action? His heart was in the right place, but he just let it get out of control. I mean, he didn't approach it well. He sort of came up with his own thing, it sounds like, and was going to, I'll just muscle my way through this thing. You know, it didn't work out. But then, as we'll see, Lord willing, once he did start doing it God's way, different story, eventually. So that's phase one of Moses' life. What do you think? I talked a lot, and I can feel it.
Like those last 40 years, it was kind of depressing. It's all we've done in the first 10 years, and then in the wilderness and not going to the promised land.
Yeah.
See people dead kind of sad that they live their whole life in the good, and the last they do something to lose it all. So.
Yeah. Yep. It's holding firm. What's that?
He went to a better reward.
Yeah, he did. Eventually went to a better reward.
I think that time in the wilderness was really kind of depressing because God seemed to realize what he messed up and
Yeah. Yep. He was an imperfect man. So we see it in the early phase, we see it in the middle phase. You know, he was a human being. So again, while his heart was in the right, he had the, we don't know how he got that idea, but he had the right, I mean, he knew that those were his people, those were God's people. He wanted to be with them. He didn't just want to be with them, he wanted to save them. But he tried to do it by his own hand. And you can't do that. You got to do things God's way. So don't let your passion get ahead of your submission to God. Moses learned that the hard way, and it could have gone a lot worse than it did. So I think providentially there was some more going on there too, because Moses could have been killed at 40 or whatever. But God had something. God did have a job for him, and ironically, it was the exact job he was trying to do before. Now let's do it my way, God says, and we'll see that, Lord willing, next week when we look at. So phase one was Exodus 2. I meant to mark this down. Phase 2, I don't know, so I don't even want to say it. I don't really know if there's a definite line between phase 2 and 3, but we at least know that he was 80 years old when he left Egypt, because that's Exodus 7, verse 7. So anyway, we'll see that when it comes. For now, if you need to respond to the invitation, make things right. Moses, eventually made things right. I think he obviously would have been devastated, mad at himself. He never blamed God for being punished for his own sin, but made it right. We have no doubt, and we need to do the same. Don't get down on yourself so much that you don't even want to make it right.